Before you hear my story, I want you to do something for me. I want you to think about the coldest you've ever been, not the fun kind of cold, where you're bundled up for a sleigh ride with hot chocolate waiting. I mean the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, the kind that feels less like a temperature and more like a final judgment. That's where my story begins. In the bone-deep, soul-stealing cold of a remote highway rest stop, with the ruby-red taillights of my son's luxury sedan shrinking into the twilight like 2 drops of blood, they thought they were abandoning a helpless 70-year-old woman. They thought they were leaving behind a burden. They forgot who I am. They forgot that you don't build the largest long-haul trucking company in the state by being helpless. My name is Beth Mitchell, and this is the story of how I helped my son and his wife fund their early retirement right out of my will. So, pour yourself a coffee, get comfortable, and let me tell you everything. The air in the car had been thick with a sickeningly sweet mix of cherry air freshener and entitlement for the last 100 miles. It was a tension I knew well, a pressure that built up before every one of Kevin's big ideas. My son, my only child, had a knack for seeing gold where there was only pyrite, and his wife, Sharon, was his ever-eager co-conspirator. She was a woman who wore ambition like a cheap perfume, overpowering and with a synthetic cloying finish. We were on our way to what they'd billed as a relaxing family road trip to see the autumn leaves, a transparent attempt to butter me up. The real reason for the trip was revealed just after we passed a sign that read, "Next services 80 miles." Kevin cleared his throat, the sound of a showman preparing his pitch. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes, so much like his father's, lacking any of Robert's warmth. They were the eyes of a salesman who had already spent the commission. He said, "Mom, Sharon and I have been working on something incredible. It's a game changer. AquaVolt. We're revolutionizing the green energy sector." I kept my gaze fixed on the blur of orange and yellow trees outside my window. I'd learned that engaging too early only fueled his fantasies. Sharon chimed in from the passenger seat, her voice a carefully manicured purr. "It's a proprietary water filtration system, Beth. It uses sonic vibrations to generate a low-level electrical charge. Clean water and clean energy, all in one. We've already got a prototype. All we need is the seed capital to scale up." I finally turned my head, meeting Kevin's eyes in the mirror again. "How much, Kevin?" He winced just a little, a tell I'd seen 1,000 times. He was hoping for a longer runway, more time to build the fantasy before dropping the price tag. Well, he started. The initial buy-in for the manufacturing equipment and the patent filings is a bit steep. To do it right, to really launch with a splash, we're looking at about 200,000. I didn't gasp. I didn't clutch my pearls. I just let the number hang in the air, heavy and absurd. $200,000. For a magic water filter that made electricity. It was the alpaca farm all over again, but with a bigger price tag. I said, "No." The word was quiet, but it landed in the car with the force of a brick through the windshield. The silence that followed was immediate and hostile. Sharon was the first to break it, twisting in her seat to face me. Her perfectly painted smile was gone, replaced by a tight, lipless line. She asked, "What do you mean, no? We haven't even shown you the business plan." "I don't need to see it, Sharon. The answer is no. This is another get-rich-quick scheme, and I will not be funding it. I've done it before, and I won't do it again. My money, the money Robert and I worked our entire lives for, is not a slush fund for your delusions." Kevin's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His voice, when he spoke, was low and strained. "It's not a delusion, Mom. It's a real opportunity. This is what we do. We find opportunities. You're supposed to support us. That's what family does." "My family," I said, the words tasting like ash, "is what I've been supporting for the last 15 years. I paid off your credit card debt after the luxury pet food business went under. I gave you the down payment for your house, the one you're living in now. I funded the coffee franchise you ran into the ground because you couldn't be bothered to open up before 10 in the morning. I am done, Kevin. The bank is closed. That's when Sharon's mask of civility crumbled completely. She let out a short, ugly laugh. The bank is closed. You hear that, Kev? Your mother, who sits on a mountain of your father's money, thinks she's a bank. No, Beth. You're not a bank. You're a burden. A financial burden we've had to plan our lives around, always wondering what we need to do to get our fair share. It's our inheritance you're sitting on. We're just asking for an advance. The cruelty of it, the sheer, unvarnished greed, took my breath away. My husband Robert hadn't just left me money. He and I had built our company from the ground up, from one rusty flatbed truck to a fleet of hundreds. I was there balancing the books at our kitchen table while he was on the road. I was the one who negotiated our first major contract. They saw none of that. They saw a doddering old woman sitting on a treasure chest they felt entitled to. My voice was shaking, but I held it together. It is not your inheritance until I am dead, Sharon. And with your attitude, you're making me want to live forever. Kevin suddenly wrenched the wheel, and the car swerved off the highway onto a ramp for a desolate-looking rest stop. It was a sad, lonely place. One squat brick building, a few picnic tables, and a vast, empty parking lot surrounded by miles of darkening woods. He screeched the car to a halt in a far corner, the engine still running. He turned around, his face a mask of cold fury. You know what, Mom? You want to be independent? Fine, be independent. Maybe a little time by yourself will help you appreciate what you have, what we do for you. He was bluffing. He had to be. This was my son, my child. I need to use the restroom, I said, my voice small. I fumbled for my purse. Sharon reached over the seat and snatched it from my lap. Oh no, you won't be needing this. You're just going to the restroom, right? You've got a few dollars in your coat pocket. That should be enough for a soda. They were really doing it. The realization dawned on me, cold and terrifying. This wasn't a bluff. This was their lesson. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like jelly. The autumn air was sharp and bit at my cheeks. I didn't look back as I walked toward the grim little building. I heard the car door slam shut. I heard the engine rev. And then I heard the sound of tires squealing on asphalt as my son and his wife drove away, leaving me alone in the middle of nowhere as night began to fall. I stood there watching those taillights disappear, and the cold I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chilling, absolute certainty that I was no longer a mother. I was just a problem they had finally solved. The first 10 minutes were a blur of pure animal panic. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ran to the edge of the parking lot, staring down the empty ribbon of highway, praying this was all a monstrously cruel joke and that their car would reappear. It didn't. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines and the frantic thumping in my own chest. I took stock of my situation, the way Robert had taught me to do whenever a rig broke down in the middle of nowhere. "Assess your resources, Beth," he'd always say. "Know what you've got before you know what you need." My resources were pitiful. I had on a light autumn coat, wholly inadequate for the plunging night temperature. In my pocket I found 4 crumpled $1 bills and some change. No phone. No identification, no credit cards. To any passing stranger, I was exactly what my children intended me to be, a confused, abandoned old woman, a charity case, a nobody. The rage came later, after the fear had exhausted itself. It started as a low, slow burn in the pit of my stomach and gradually spread through me, chasing away the cold. How had it come to this? I sank onto a splintered picnic bench, the rough wood digging into my legs, and let my mind drift back. It wasn't a sudden break. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, a long, slow erosion of respect that had started years ago. I remembered Kevin in his 20s, full of dreams that were always bigger than his work ethic. His first brilliant idea was a line of bespoke hand-carved birdhouses. He bought hundreds of dollars worth of exotic wood with my money, spent a weekend in the garage making a mess, and produced exactly 3 lopsided, unsellable birdhouses before declaring that the market wasn't sophisticated enough for his art. I covered the loss. Then came the gourmet dog biscuit phase, inspired by a poodle he'd seen in a movie. He'd insisted on using only human-grade organic ingredients. The kitchen was a disaster zone for a month. He sold 2 bags to a sympathetic neighbor before the rest of the inventory molded in the garage. I paid to have the mess cleaned up. The memories flooded in, each one a testament to my own foolishness. The alpaca wool scheme where he was convinced he could corner the market on ethical yarn. He bought 2 ill-tempered alpacas that spat at me every time I went into the backyard. They chewed through the fence and disappeared after a week. He called it a business expense. I called it Tuesday. Why did I do it? What was I supposed to do? That's the question I ask myself now. The answer is tangled up in a promise I made to a dying man. Robert, my Robert. He was a man made of diesel fumes and integrity. He could fix a busted transmission with a wrench and a prayer, and he loved our son with a fierce, blinding hope. On his last days in that sterile beige hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fear, he held my hand. His own, usually so strong and capable, felt as fragile as a bird's wing. He whispered, "Beth, look after our boy. He's got a good heart. He needs a little more time to find his footing. Don't let him flounder. Promise me." And I, a woman who would have promised him the moon and the stars if he'd asked, said yes, I promised. For 10 years after his death, I kept that promise. I mistook enabling for nurturing. I mistook financial handouts for footing. I thought I was honoring my husband, but I was crippling my son, feeding the very weakness Robert had hoped Kevin would outgrow. Every check I wrote, every debt I paid was another brick in the wall of entitlement that now stood between us. Sharon only made it worse. When she came into the picture, she saw Kevin not as a project to be fixed, but as a lottery ticket waiting to be cashed. She didn't temper his worst instincts. She amplified them. She gave his flimsy ideas the veneer of a business plan, peppering them with buzzwords like synergy and disruption. She saw my love for my son, my promise to my dead husband, as a weakness to be exploited. She was the one who taught him to see me not as his mother, but as the director of finance for Kevin and Sharon, Incorporated. They saw me as a bank, not a mother. That thought echoed in the vast, empty quiet of the rest stop. It was the truth, stark and ugly. The Aquavolt scheme wasn't just another bad idea. It was the culmination of their life's work, the systematic mining of my love and my resources. My refusal wasn't just a no to a business proposition. It was an abdication of my role as their personal ATM. And for that, I had been discarded. Literally thrown away. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, so heavy it felt like I might drown in it. The anger receded, leaving behind a hollow ache. This was the low point. This was the moment of private despair, alone on a splintered bench in the middle of nowhere, confronting the full, crushing weight of my children's monstrous indifference. They hadn't just left me, they had erased me. In their minds, the mother who raised them, who bandaged their knees and read them bedtime stories, was already gone. Only her money remained, and they would get that one way or another. I shivered, and this time it was from a cold that came from deep within. The sun had completely set, and the world was painted in shades of gray and black. A lone truck rumbled past on the highway, its headlights cutting a swath through the darkness. It was a Mitchell trucking rig. I could tell by the silhouette, by the specific configuration of the lights. For 30 years I had watched those trucks roll out, each one a symbol of everything Robert and I had built together. We had started with nothing but a second-hand Kenworth and a shared dream. Now, our name was on the side of over 500 trucks, crisscrossing the country day and night, and my son, the heir to all of this, had abandoned me at a rest stop for $200,000. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clean break, like a frozen branch cracking in the winter wind. The promise I made to Robert, it was to look after our boy, not to finance his destruction. It was to help him find his footing, not to pave his path to ruin with my life savings. Robert would not have wanted this. He would have been horrified. He would have seen their actions for what they were, a betrayal not just of me, but of his entire legacy. The sadness evaporated, replaced by something new, something hard and clear and cold as ice. It was resolve. The woman who had been weeping on the bench was gone. The woman who remained was Beth Mitchell, the co-founder and silent majority owner of the largest long-haul company in the state. They had forgotten who they were dealing with. They had made a calculated business decision, treating me like a non-performing asset to be liquidated. Fine, I would make a business decision of my own. It wasn't about revenge until it was, and in that moment, sitting in the biting cold, I decided it was. They wanted me to be a financial calculation. So be it. I was about to rebalance the books. The first step was survival. The temperature was dropping fast, and my thin coat was a joke against the encroaching night. I needed a plan, and not just for the next hour, but for the next 40 years of my life, however many I had left. My mind, which had been foggy with grief and shock, suddenly felt sharp, honed by the cold and the clarity of my new purpose. Robert and I had built fail-safes into the company, protocols for every imaginable disaster, a driver in distress, a hijacked load, a natural disaster. We even had a protocol for this, or something close enough. It was an old system, something we designed back in the 90s, long before every driver had a smartphone. We called it the Northstar protocol. Every Mitchell rig was equipped with a satellite communication terminal, a direct, secure link to our central dispatch in the capital. It was mostly used for logistics, but it had a hidden function, a series of code words known only to me, Robert, and our most trusted senior manager, David Chen, could trigger specific alerts. The code word sundown was the most critical. It flagged a message as a personal emergency from me or Robert, bypassing all normal channels and going directly to David's personal phone and computer, no matter the time of day or night. It was a digital flare, a cry for help that only one person in the world would hear. The problem was I was here, and the satellite terminal was in a truck. I needed a truck, a Mitchell truck. I got up from the bench, my joints stiff and protesting. I walked to the edge of the service road that led into the parking lot, my eyes scanning the distant highway. It was a long shot. This was just one of thousands of rest stops across the state, but our routes were like arteries, and this highway was a major one. Sooner or later, one of my trucks would have to pass by. It was a waiting game. I used $2 of my $4 on a cup of hot, watery coffee from a rusty vending machine. The warmth in my hands was a small comfort, a tiny anchor in the vast, cold darkness. I stood there, a lone silhouette by the curb, sipping my bitter coffee and watching the endless river of headlights flow past on the interstate. For an hour I watched cars, RVs, and trucks from a dozen different companies roared by, their slipstreams buffeting me with cold air. My hope began to fray at the edges. What if I was wrong? What if no one came? And then I saw it. It was more than a mile away, but unmistakable. The high cab, the long silver trailer, and the specific pattern of the amber running lights along the top. A Mitchell rig. It was staying in the right lane, its turn signal blinking, preparing to exit. My heart leaped. The truck rumbled down the ramp and into the rest stop, its air brakes hissing like a giant weary beast. It pulled into a long spot at the far end of the lot, away from the main building. The engine idled for a moment and then cut out, plunging the area into a deeper silence. I started walking toward it, my steps feeling purposeful for the first time in hours. As I got closer, I could see the driver's silhouette in the cab, lit by the faint glow of his dashboard. He was a big man, broad-shouldered. He was probably settling in for his mandated rest break. Approaching a strange trucker in the middle of the night at a deserted rest stop was, objectively, a terrible idea. But I wasn't just any old woman. This wasn't just any trucker. He was one of mine. I walked right up to the driver's side door and knocked on the fuel tank, a sound I knew would be heard clearly in the cab. The silhouette inside straightened up, startled. The door opened with a squeal of hydraulics, and the driver leaned out, peering down at me. He had a kind, tired face, a thick mustache, and a baseball cap pulled low. He said, a little gruffly, "Can I help you, ma'am? It's late to be out here." I looked straight up at him, my voice steady. "My name is Beth Mitchell. My son left me here. I need to use your SATCOM terminal. It's an emergency." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and pity. He probably heard stories like this all the time. He likely thought I was a confused grandmother, addled by age or dementia. He said, "I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am, but this is a company vehicle. I can't let civilians use the equipment. I can call the state troopers for you if you like. They can help." "No," I said firmly. "No troopers. I don't need the troopers. I need you to send a message to David Chen. The code is sundown." The driver's eyes widened. He blinked, as if he couldn't quite process what he'd heard. The Northstar protocol wasn't public knowledge, but every driver was trained on the emergency codes. They knew sundown was the big one, the one you never ever used unless it was a life or death situation involving the owners themselves. For an old woman at a rest stop to know that word, it was impossible. He leaned further out of the cab, his gruffness gone, replaced by a cautious respect. You're Mrs. Mitchell? Robert Mitchell's wife?" "The one and only," I said, a small weary smile touching my lips for the first time that night. "Now about that message." "My name's Mike," he said, scrambling down from the cab. "Mike Kowalski. I've been with the company for 15 years. Mr. Mitchell hired me himself." "Of course. Anything you need." He led me around to the passenger side and helped me climb up into the surprisingly clean and spacious cab. It smelled of coffee and leather. He fired up the auxiliary power, and the small cabin filled with a low hum and a welcome warmth. He gestured to the communication terminal, mounted on the dash. I typed in the code, then a short, simple message: "Sundown, stranded at I-80 rest stop, mile marker 114. Need immediate assistance. No authorities. Beth." I hit send. The message flew out into the blackness, a tiny packet of data on its way to a satellite, then back down to the one man I knew would understand. "Now, we wait," I said, leaning back in the comfortable passenger seat. Mike sat back in his own seat, studying me with a look of awe and concern. "Mrs. Mitchell, if you don't mind my asking, what happened? Your son. He just left you here?" I gave him the short version, leaving out the ugliness of the financial demands, focusing only on the act of abandonment. Mike listened, his jaw tightening. He shook his head, his expression dark. I've got 3 kids of my own. I can't imagine, I just can't. Mr. Mitchell, he talked about you all the time, said you were the brains of the operation. He said this company was as much yours as it was his. Hearing that, hearing Robert's words, echoed back to me by this stranger, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just my company, it was my legacy. It was the physical manifestation of a lifetime of hard work and partnership, and I was going to protect it. Mike then told me about his own family, how his youngest daughter had been born with a heart defect, needing multiple expensive surgeries. He told me, with tears welling in his eyes, that the company's health insurance, the generous plan that Robert and I had insisted on, had covered every penny. It saved her life, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It saved our family from bankruptcy. We'd have lost everything. This company, it's not just a job to me, ma'am. It's a lifeline. His story was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the stark, undeniable contrast. My own blood, my son, saw my life's work as a piggy bank to be smashed open. This man, this loyal employee, saw it as the bedrock that his family's survival was built on. The path forward became crystal clear. My resources, my legacy, would no longer be directed at the ungrateful. They would be redirected to the deserving, to the Mikes of the world. Less than 20 minutes later, the terminal beeped. A message from David Chen. Message received. Help is on the way. ETA 45 minutes. A car is being dispatched to your location. I have booked you a suite at the Grand Excelsior under the name of Kowalski. Your lawyer, Arthur Vance, has been notified and will meet you there in the morning. Stay put. We have you. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy. The wheels were turning. The vast, powerful machine that I had built was now moving to my command. My children thought they had left me helpless. They had no idea that they had just unleashed a titan. Mike read the message over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. The Grand Excelsior, huh? He said with a grin. You're not messing around, Mrs. Mitchell. No, Mike, I said, looking out the windshield into the darkness. I'm not messing around anymore. The car that arrived was a discreet black town car, the kind that blends into the background. The driver was a quiet professional from a service the company kept on retainer for executive transport. He addressed me as Mrs. Kowalski, just as David had arranged. Mike helped me down from the truck, his concern genuine. Are you going to be all right, Mrs. Mitchell? He asked, his brow furrowed. I placed a hand on his arm. I'm going to be more than all right, Mike. Thank you. You have no idea what you've done for me tonight. He just nodded. Anytime, boss. Anytime. As the town car pulled smoothly away from the rest stop, I looked back and saw Mike standing by his rig, a solid, reassuring figure in the lonely darkness. He was my first ally, the first person to see me not as a burden but as a leader. The ride to the city was silent. I watched the dark countryside give way to the suburbs, and then to the glittering lights of the downtown skyline. We drove past the headquarters of Mitchell Trucking, a sleek, modern 10-story building, with our name emblazoned near the top in simple, strong letters. My son and Sharon probably drove past it every day, never once considering that the old woman they tolerated was the one who signed the checks that kept the lights on. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The suite at the Grand Excelsior was magnificent. It was larger than my son's entire condominium, with sweeping views of the city lights. There was a fruit basket on the table and a note from the hotel manager welcoming me. David's efficiency was a balm to my frayed nerves. I took a long, hot shower, washing away the grime and the humiliation of the last several hours. As I stood under the steaming water, I felt the last vestiges of the frightened, abandoned woman wash down the drain. The person who emerged, wrapped in a thick, fluffy hotel robe, was someone else entirely. She was focused. She was strategic. She was in control. The first move had to be decisive and silent. Cutting them off was the goal, but I had to do it in a way that was legally ironclad. Kevin and Sharon were like rats. They would chew through any legal loophole they could find. I needed a fortress. The next morning, my lawyer, Arthur Vance, arrived. Arthur was a man who seemed to be made of tweed and shrewd intelligence. He had been our family's lawyer for 40 years. He drafted the company's incorporation papers on my dining room table. He knew where every single body was buried, because he had helped us bury most of them, legally speaking. He was one of the few people in the world who knew that I wasn't just Robert's widow. I was the silent 51% majority shareholder of Mitchell Trucking. Robert had insisted on it. He always said, "You're the steady hand, Beth. I'm the gas pedal, but you're the rudder. The company needs its rudder." Arthur entered the suite, his expression grim. "David filled me in on the basic situation, Beth, but I want to hear it from you." I told him everything. The Aquavolt scheme, the argument, the insults, the abandonment at the rest stop. I didn't cry. My voice was as level and steady as a surveyor's tool. When I finished, Arthur simply removed his glasses and polished them slowly with a handkerchief, a sure sign that he was processing a particularly nasty piece of business. Finally, he put his glasses back on. His eyes were hard. "They want to play hardball," he said. "All right, we can do that. Your will currently leaves everything to Kevin, as per your and Robert's original wishes. It's straightforward, but a will can be contested. They could try to argue undue influence or diminished capacity later on. It gets messy. We need something cleaner, stronger. What do you suggest, Arthur?" "A revocable living trust," he said, his voice warming to the topic. "It's a beautiful instrument for a situation like this. We retitle all your major assets, the company shares, the house, your investment portfolios, into the name of the trust. You are the trustee, so you retain full control over everything while you're alive. You can do whatever you want with the assets, but you name a successor trustee. In this case, David Chen seems appropriate, and you dictate exactly what happens to the assets upon your death. The key is, a trust isn't subject to probate. It doesn't become a public record like a will does, and it's vastly more difficult to challenge. We can change the beneficiaries with a simple amendment, and they won't know a thing until it's too late." A plan began to form in my mind, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. "I want to set up a new foundation," I said. "The Robert Mitchell Legacy Fund. Its mission will be to provide educational grants and family support for the employees of Mitchell Trucking and their children. Upon my death, I want the trust to liquidate all assets, everything, and transfer the proceeds to the foundation." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Everything, Beth. The house, the company, everything," I repeated. "Let the company be sold to a competitor, or better yet, restructured as an employee-owned cooperative. Let the house be sold. Let every last penny of the life Robert and I built go to the people who helped us build it, the people who understand the value of a hard day's work. Let Kevin and Sharon get nothing, not a dime, not a photograph, nothing." Arthur allowed himself a small, thin smile. "It can be done. I'll have the trust documents drafted by tomorrow. We'll need to start the process of retitling the assets, which will take a few weeks. In the meantime, what about their more immediate access to your funds?" I'd already thought of that. "They have a supplementary credit card on my primary account. I want it canceled immediately. There's also a joint savings account we set up years ago for emergencies. I am the primary holder. I want you to wire the entire balance, every last cent, into a new account in my name only." "Consider it done," he said, making notes on a legal pad. As he worked my new phone, a simple prepaid device David had sent over, buzzed on the table. It was a text from Kevin. "Mom, are you okay? We got home and you weren't there. We're getting worried. Please call us." I showed the text to Arthur. He snorted. "The performance begins. They've established their alibi. They'll be expecting a call from a state trooper, or from you, full of tears and apologies for being so difficult. They'll be waiting a long time," I said, deleting the message without a reply. The silence was my first weapon. For the next 2 days I remained in the hotel, speaking only to Arthur and David. We worked methodically, like a demolition crew preparing a building for a controlled implosion. We canceled credit cards. We transferred funds. We drafted the documents for the trust, a fortress of legal language designed to be impenetrable. On the 3rd day, the panicked texts from Kevin started turning into voicemails. His voice was tight with frustration. "Mom, this isn't funny. Call me back. Sharon is worried sick." I could almost hear Sharon in the background, coaching him. By the 5th day, the panic was palpable. "Mom, where are you? We've called the hospitals. We're about to file a missing persons report. Just pick up the phone." They were getting scared, not for my well-being, I knew, but for their own. Their carefully constructed world was beginning to shake. They had pushed what they thought was a button to dispense a lesson, but it turned out to be a detonator. The foundations of their comfortable life were cracking, and they couldn't understand why. They had no idea that the real earthquake was still to come. I sat in my luxurious suite, high above the city they lived in, and I felt nothing but a cold, calm sense of anticipation. The silent takeover was well underway. The isolation of my son and his wife began not with a bang, but with a phone call. I knew Kevin's panic would eventually lead him to cast a wider net. He'd start contacting other family members, trying to create a narrative where he was the concerned son and I was the unstable matriarch. I decided to preempt him. I called my niece Sarah. She was my sister's daughter, a sensible, kind-hearted nurse a few years younger than Kevin. She had always been my favorite, a quiet observer in our family who saw more than she let on. We had a bond, forged over years of holiday dinners where she and I would roll our eyes in unison at Kevin's latest grandiose pronouncements. She picked up on the second ring. "Aunt Beth, I was just about to call you. Kevin just phoned me." And he sounded frantic. "He said you two had a little argument, and you wandered off from a rest stop. He made it sound like you were having some sort of episode." I was so worried. His version of the story, predictable. I took a deep breath. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, and I need you to promise me you will keep it in the strictest confidence for now." "Of course, Aunt Beth. Anything." I told her the truth. I didn't embellish or editorialize. I just laid out the facts. The demand for money, my refusal, and the deliberate, calculated act of abandonment. I told her they took my purse and my phone. I told her I was safe, but that I was making some significant changes in my life. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was choked with fury. "They left you? They left you there like a bag of trash on the side of the road? That's monstrous. I don't even have a word for it." She understood. The validation was a profound relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This was as ugly as I thought it was. "I'm telling you this, Sarah, because I need you to be my eyes and ears. Kevin is going to try to paint me as unstable. He has to. It's the only way his actions make any sense. If he calls you again, I just want you to listen. Don't let on that we've spoken. I trust you." "You can trust me, Aunt Beth," she said, her voice firm now. "I can't believe him. After everything you've done for him. He's my cousin. But this is unforgivable. As far as I'm concerned, he and that horrible wife of his are dead to me." Her words were a balm. It was the beginning of the exodus, the first crack in the facade of family that Kevin and Sharon relied upon. They believed the family would automatically side with them, the vibrant young couple, against the difficult old woman. They had miscalculated badly. The next tremor hit their bank account. I had Arthur check the activity on the now canceled credit card. As expected, there were a series of declined transactions, a $50 charge at a high-end grocery store, a $200 charge at a fancy boutique Sharon favored, and the big one, a $3,000 charge at a travel agency, which was declined with prejudice. They were likely trying to book a vacation, completely oblivious to the fact that their funding had been cut off at the source. The real blow came when they tried to use their debit card. I could picture the scene perfectly. Sharon at the checkout, her cart piled high with organic kale and imported cheese. Her card declined. The embarrassment, the confusion, the dawning horror. They would have checked their account balance online and seen a number that was shockingly close to zero. The joint savings account I had drained now held a balance of $4.31, an amount I had left there out of a sense of pure, unadulterated spite. Their desperation escalated immediately. The texts became a torrent of panicked demands. "Mom, what did you do? Our account is empty." "Was it you? This is theft. Call me now." Then came the banging on my front door. My neighbor, a sweet retired schoolteacher named Carol, called me on my new phone. "Beth, are you all right? Kevin and his wife are here, and they're making a terrible scene. They're shouting and pounding on your door. They look frantic. I told them I hadn't seen you, but they don't seem to believe me." "Thank you for letting me know, Carol. Don't worry, I'm perfectly safe. If they become destructive, please don't hesitate to call the police." They were flailing, acting exactly as I knew they would. Their entire lifestyle was a house of cards built on my money, and I had just pulled out the foundation. They had no savings of their own, no real marketable skills beyond spending my fortune. Kevin had a degree in art history that he'd never used, and Sharon's career seemed to consist of attending brunch and updating her social media. Their counter moves weren't strategic. They were the desperate thrashing of two people who had just been thrown into the deep end of the pool without their water wings. The climax of their panic came in the form of a registered letter from a lawyer they had scraped together the money to hire. Arthur read it to me over the phone from his office, a note of amusement in his voice. He said, "It's a classic demand letter. It accuses you of unlawfully withholding jointly held marital assets and inflicting emotional distress. They are demanding the immediate reinstatement of all financial support and are threatening to pursue legal action to have you declared mentally incompetent and have a conservatorship established, with your loving son Kevin as the conservator." A conservatorship. So that was their end game. Have me declared senile so they could gain full legal control of the entire Mitchell estate. It was audacious. It was vile, and it was the final nail in their own coffin. "They think they can have me declared incompetent?" I asked Arthur, a cold laugh bubbling up inside me. "Oh, it's their only move, Beth," he said. "It's a Hail Mary pass. But to do that, they have to get you into a courtroom. They have to serve you papers. They have to find you, and then they would have to prove their case to a judge. They think they're dealing with a confused old woman who can be easily bullied by a man in a suit." "Well then," I said, "let's give them what they want. Let's arrange a meeting." The stage was set in Arthur's conference room. It was a room designed to convey power and unshakable stability. The walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes. The table was a single massive slab of polished granite, cool and unyielding to the touch. I chose my seat carefully at the head of the table, with my back to the large window that overlooked the city. When they entered, the light would be behind me, making me a silhouette, a figure of authority. Arthur had sent the invitation for the meeting, a family conference to discuss long-term financial planning and asset management. It was bait, and they took it hook, line, and sinker. They arrived precisely on time, dressed in what they clearly considered their most serious and intimidating outfits. Kevin wore a dark suit that was slightly too tight in the shoulders, and Sharon was in a severe black dress, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. They looked like cheap undertakers. They walked in, saw me at the head of the table, and faltered for a second. They had expected to find me here, yes, but not like this, not looking so calm, so composed. I was wearing a simple but elegant silk blouse and tailored trousers. I felt a million miles away from the terrified woman in the threadbare coat at the rest stop. They had expected a victim. They found a queen on her throne. Sharon recovered first, her voice dripping with false concern. "Beth, thank God, we were so worried. To just disappear like that. We thought something terrible had happened to you." I didn't answer. I just looked at her, my expression unreadable. Kevin stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the table with a thud. "Mom, we need to talk. We received a letter from your lawyer. We need to straighten this out. There's been a huge misunderstanding." Arthur, who had been standing quietly by the bookshelf, stepped forward. "I think there has been no misunderstanding at all, Mr. Mitchell. Please, have a seat." They sat looking uncomfortable in the large leather chairs. They looked small and out of their depth. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the acoustically perfect room. "You left me," I said. "You left me in the middle of nowhere with no phone and no money. You took my purse. You drove away. These are not the actions of worried children. These are the actions of thieves." Sharon gasped, clutching her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "How can you say that? We were trying to teach you a lesson. You were being so difficult, so unreasonable. We were going to come back for you." The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Kevin jumped in, trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous. We're here to talk about the accounts you froze. That money is our family's security. You can't just cut us off." "Your family's security?" I asked. "Let me be very clear about something. It was never our money. It was my money. And it was my late husband's money. It was the result of our labor, not your birthright. You saw it as a resource to be plundered. You felt entitled to it. And the moment that resource was denied to you, you showed your true colors." I leaned forward slightly. "I have to thank you, actually. You gave me a gift that night. You gave me clarity. For years I was blinded by a foolish promise, by a mother's misguided hope. You cured me of that. You burned it all away." Kevin was starting to look panicked. He glanced at Arthur, then back at me. "What are you talking about? What is this about?" "This," I said, gesturing around the room, "is about the new reality, your reality. You see, when you left me at that rest stop, you thought you were leaving a helpless old woman. You forgot about Mitchell Trucking." Kevin scoffed. "What does Dad's old company have to do with anything? It's just some trust fund thing that sends you a check every month." I smiled. A real, genuine smile. It felt wonderful. "Oh, Kevin, you foolish, foolish boy. It's not a trust fund. It was never a trust fund. Your father and I started that company with one truck and a dream. I wasn't just the bookkeeper. I was his partner. And when he died, he didn't leave me his shares. He didn't have to, because I already owned them. 51% to be exact. I am, and have been for 30 years, the silent majority owner of Mitchell Trucking." The silence in the room was absolute. Kevin and Sharon just stared at me, their faces a perfect tableau of disbelief. It was as if I had just announced I was the Queen of England. The concept was so far outside their understanding of the world that their brains simply couldn't process it. Sharon found her voice first. a strangled whisper. You're lying. Arthur chose that moment to step forward and place a single thick document on the table in front of them. He said, "These are the articles of incorporation and the current shareholder ledger for Mitchell Trucking, Incorporated. As you can see, my client, Beth Mitchell, is listed as the majority shareholder. It's all a matter of public record, if you'd ever bothered to look." Kevin stared at the paper, his mouth hanging open. He looked from the document to me and back again. His world was visibly tilting on its axis. "So when you left me stranded," I said, picking up the thread of my story, "I wasn't alone for long. An hour later, one of my drivers, on my direct instruction, picked me up. One of my 500 drivers, in one of my 500 trucks, all of which you apparently thought had nothing to do with me." I let that sink in. I watched the gears turning in their heads, the slow, agonizing dawn of comprehension. The fear in their eyes was being replaced by something else, pure, unadulterated terror. And in the days since, I continued, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, "I have been busy. Arthur has helped me restructure my estate. Your letter mentioned you were concerned about my competency and my long-term financial planning. I agree. It was high time I put my affairs in order. So I did. I have established a revocable living trust, the Beth Mitchell Revocable Living Trust. All of my assets, the house, the stocks, my controlling interest in the company, have been transferred into it." Kevin finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "A trust, what does that mean?" Arthur answered him, his tone dry and clinical. "It means that upon your mother's death, there is no will to contest. The assets in the trust are distributed according to the terms she has set. It's private, it's immediate, and it is legally airtight." "And what are the terms?" Sharon asked, her voice barely a squeak. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. It was the checkmate, the final game-ending move. "The terms are simple. Upon my death, all assets will be liquidated. The entire fortune you have been counting on, the family resources you felt so entitled to, will become the seed money for a new charitable foundation, the Robert Mitchell Legacy Fund, which will provide scholarships and family assistance to the employees of Mitchell Trucking. Your early retirement, as it were, has just been rerouted to fund the college educations of the children of people like Mike Kowalski, the driver who rescued me. As for you two, your names do not appear anywhere in the document. You will inherit nothing, not a penny, not a photograph, not a stick of furniture. It's over." The aftermath was not an explosion, but a collapse. Sharon started to sob, not tears of grief, but of pure, frustrated rage. Kevin just sat there, white as a sheet, staring at the granite tabletop as if it held the secrets to the universe, the future they had imagined for themselves. A life of effortless luxury funded by my death had just evaporated. He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in his life. "Mom, you can't. We're your family." I stood up, my chair scraping softly on the floor. "You stopped being my family on the side of that highway. You made a business decision. This is just the logical outcome of that decision. You have your health. You have your education. I suggest you get jobs. Arthur will validate your parking." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to stare into the abyss they had dug for themselves. I didn't look back. A few months have passed since that day. The autumn leaves they were so eager to see have long since fallen and been swept away, much like the debris of my former life. I'm standing on a small stage in the main depot of Mitchell Trucking. The air smells of diesel and hot coffee, a scent I've always found more comforting than any perfume. In front of me are hundreds of my employees and their families. It's a crisp Saturday morning, and we're here to officially launch the Robert Mitchell Legacy Fund. Mike Kowalski is here, standing in the front row with his wife and his daughter, the little girl with the mended heart. She's holding a big bouquet of flowers for me. Later today, she'll be the first recipient of a full college scholarship from the fund. When I look out at these faces, I don't see employees. I see partners. I see the people whose loyalty and hard work built this company alongside Robert and me. I see family, a real one. I sold my big empty house in the suburbs. It was full of too many ghosts and too many disappointing memories. I moved into a beautiful penthouse apartment downtown with a view of the river. It's modern and clean and filled only with things that bring me joy. Sarah, my niece, helped me decorate. She visits me for dinner twice a week, and her laughter is the best sound in the world. As for Kevin and Sharon, I hear things. Sarah tells me, though I've asked her not to, they had to sell their condo. The bank foreclosed on it. They're renting a small apartment in a less fashionable part of town. Sharon is working as a hostess in a restaurant, a bitter pill for someone who used to only dine at them. And Kevin, the man of 1,000 brilliant ideas, finally found a job that suits his talents. He's a valet at a high-end hotel, parking the cars of the wealthy people he so desperately wanted to be. Sometimes, I wonder if he ever thinks about me when a rich old woman hands him her keys. I hope so. Looking back, the strangest thing is that I don't feel anger anymore. What they did was monstrous, but it was also a gift. They forced me to wake up. They forced me to reclaim my own life, my own power. It was never really about the money. It was about respect. It was about being seen for who I am, not for what I have. My son and his wife couldn't see me, so I had to take myself and my life's work and give it to people who could. It wasn't about revenge, not in the end. It was about restoration, restoring the balance, restoring the legacy of a good man, my Robert, and ensuring that what we built would create value in the world, not just fund a life of lazy entitlement. So now I turn to you. Maybe you have a Kevin or a Sharon in your life, someone who sees you as a resource, not a person, someone who mistakes your kindness for weakness. My story is not just about a mother's revenge. It's a reminder that your value is not determined by how others see you. It is determined by you. You hold the controlling shares in your own life. You decide where your assets, your time, your love, your energy, your resources are invested. Don't let anyone devalue your stock. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is rewrite the will, change the beneficiaries, and redirect your legacy to those who truly deserve it. You are the rudder. Never forget that. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace? Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Remember to take care of yourselves and each other.